Imagine a war fought not with clashing armies on a vast open battlefield, but with whispers in shadowed alleys, with scientific races to the heavens, and with the constant, terrifying threat of total annihilation held in delicate balance.
This was the Cold War, a prolonged and global struggle that began in the smoldering ashes of the Second World War and defined the latter half of the 20th century. It was a conflict of ideologies, a tense duel between two superpowers with profoundly different visions for the future of humanity. This standoff, a war that was never officially declared and never fought directly between its main belligerents, would go on to shape international politics, accelerate technological innovation, and fundamentally alter the fabric of daily life for generations across the entire globe, leaving a legacy we still grapple with today, on this day, January 24, 2026. The year 1945 marked not an end to global conflict, but the beginning of a new and arguably more insidious one. As the victorious Allied powers celebrated the defeat of the Axis, a deep and unbridgeable chasm was already forming. On one side stood the United States, a champion of capitalism, liberal democracy, and individual freedoms, its economy booming and its military might unparalleled. On the other side was the Soviet Union, a vast nation forged in communist revolution, advocating for state control, a single-party system. The 1960s ushered in the single most dangerous moment of the entire Cold War. In October of 1962, the world held its breath for 13 agonizing days during the Cuban Missile Crisis. An American U-2 spy plane discovered Soviet missiles being installed in Cuba, just 90 miles off Florida. For President John F. Kennedy and his advisors, this was an unacceptable provocation, a direct threat that shifted the balance of power. Major American cities could be hit with only minutes to react. Kennedy ordered a naval quarantine to stop further shipments and demanded removal of existing weapons. Soviet ships steamed toward the blockade while the world watched in terror. Behind the scenes, frantic secret negotiations unfolded. A deal emerged. Khrushchev would remove the missiles. The U.S. publicly pledged not to invade Cuba and secretly agreed to remove missiles from Turkey. A peak, but not the end. The Cold War also spawned protracted proxy wars. Vietnam became the most prominent and divisive example. The United States sent hundreds of thousands of troops to South Vietnam, fighting the North and the Viet Cong, who were supplied by China and the Soviet Union. The war dragged on, exposing limits of American power and immense human and political costs. Superpower rivalry played out globally, turning local disputes into international flashpoints. Africa, Latin America, the Middle East. In each region, Washington and Moscow backed opposing factions. Governments, guerrillas, weapons, funding, advisors. Afghanistan. These wars were anything but cold for local populations. They caused widespread destruction and cost millions of lives. The geopolitical chess match had real, often tragic consequences for people thousands of miles away. By the 1980s, the foundations of the Cold War order began to crack. The Soviet Union's image of monolithic strength masked severe internal problems. A stagnating planned economy, crushing military burdens, and shortages eroded living standards and morale. The long, costly Afghan war became a bleeding wound. Mikhail Gorbachev's rise in 1985 brought glasnost and perestroika. Openness and restructuring sought to save the system, and instead unleashed forces he could not control. Popular movements for democracy and independence surged across Eastern Europe. On November 9, 1989, East Germans were told they could cross freely. Euphoric crowds swarmed the Berlin Wall and began to tear it down. One by one, communist governments collapsed.
In 1991, the Soviet Union itself dissolved into 15 republics, ending a 45-year struggle with a quiet shock. The Cold War was a war of ideas, of threats, and of influence, never the full-scale battle so many feared. Its end did not restore the past, it redrew the world. New alliances formed. The U.S. stood alone for a time, and investments yielded satellites, GPS, and the internet. Hard lessons of deterrence, limits of power, and the value of diplomacy endure.